Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Deija and I'm the artist behind Starstruck Pups Art, where I create a lot of pet portraits and other dog themed artworks. But today I'm going to be showing you guys the behind the scenes process for a pet portrait that I created for a friend this past December. It was a gift for him for Christmas. This is his dog Callie that we'll be painting today. She is really stinking cute. And here's how I created her after adding a little bit of my own flavor. I was really happy with how she came out, and just wanted to share that process with you guys since I had so much positive feedback from some of the posts I made on my social media of her, and just thought it was a good example for how I create my pet portraits. So let's just get started and I hope you enjoy. First, I lay some neon pink onto my acrylic paper so that I don't have any of that negative white space. I don't know what it is, but it really messes with me as I paint and kind of messes with my color selection. So I like to think that this kind of helps to balance me out. But more than that, one thing that I really can't stand when I'm painting is seeing just the tiniest little white spaces on either my canvas or my acrylic paper because the paint hasn't completely covered it. If you're a painter, you know that this happens all the time and it's something that I battled with. So I decided to just lay down this pink undercoat so that at the very least, if a little bit of paint isn't going to completely cover different parts of my canvas, I'll have at least some type of color under there that isn't just white. I also like to think that by using the neon pink underneath, that it actually sets the tone for the painting that I'm creating. Obviously, I'm doing layer after layer of paint, but I truly do believe that that neon pink shines through the layers and gives a warmer look. As I work on the fur around Callie's eyes, I'm trying to look towards my reference photo and actually find the colors that I see underneath her fur coat. So incorporating that dark brown by the edges of her eyes and the caramel color leading towards the ends of her face. And then from there, I know that I'm going to be building up using more of that cream coat color. Now, I want to make a point of saying that even though I'm working very hard on this first layer of color with Callie, I'm very aware that odds are throughout the process of me painting her fur, I'm going to need to add so many more layers of color on top of my original layer that it almost doesn't even matter how I put down that first layer. It's just a way for me to be able to see, okay, I need to have a little bit of darkness here. I need to add some more fur here. So you'll notice that I really work and rework these areas multiple times, not because I'm messing up, but because that is a part of the process for building up a realistic looking fur. As I work around the fur of Callie's mouth, it's very clear that it's a very cream, almost white color. However, it's much easier for me to lay down this darker brown color that you find in the shadows behind her cream and white fur now than it will be to start with white and then try to add those shadows later. One quick tip I could give you about painting pets' eyes in portraits is to start with a dark brown that almost looks black but not quite using black yet. It'll help you later down the line as you create the different shines and contours within the eye to make it look more realistic. This way you can apply the black to the outer edges where it's actually concave in comparison to the front of the eye where you want it to still seem very dark but not as dark as the edges of the eye, which is where that dark brown base really comes in handy. Later on, you'll see me add different colors to the eyes to help create that shine and the illusion of a real eye, but for now, I'll just leave you with that useful tip that I discovered over my own journey. To create the more highlighted colors in Callie's fur, sometimes I lay down darker browns against lighter browns, but sometimes I just full on use a much lighter color to actually show exactly where the sun's hitting down and really making that fur look really white. I'd also like to be very clear that through the making of this painting, I actually only have tops 5 different colors in front of me that I'm just using intermittently and maybe combining some of the 5 different colors. But for paintings like this, where you have a bunch of different shades, shadows, highlights on a dog, you really don't want to let things get too out of hand by working with a million different colors. It's so much easier to just work within a specific color range and find the different shades that you need within those. Working on the chin, I actually started to add some really bright highlights, but then I realized that they were just far too similar to the highlights that were on the left and right side of her face, which are clearly much brighter than her actual chin is in the reference photo. So I go back in with a little bit of a darker brown and just correct that to make sure that my values are looking, proportional to the actual reference photo. After fixing the chin, I realized that I have some work to do on the left side of Callie's face as well, because it's a lot brighter on that side of the actual reference photo where the sun is hitting the left side of her face. So I'm just going to start by building it up slowly with a little bit more of a light cream color, and you'll see that over the painting, I'll even continue to add a little bit more whiteness to that left side to properly show the sun hitting it. Alas, it's time for me to get rid of that Hitler stash. I was not necessarily loving the look of it, but obviously you need to do that much darker undercoat to help you later when you add the fur on top. As you could see in the reference photo, there is a lot darker of an undercoat on her upper lip, so I had to keep that there. I was more than happy to get rid of it though, because Callie's so much cuter without that little crazy stash going on there. At this point, I'm going to start working on the highlighted fur at the top of Callie's head. Sometimes it could be a little bit hard for me to add a really stark version of a different color next to some others, so having that really bright white next to the light brown doesn't feel right to me, because I've always been someone who just loves to blend and blend and blend until you can't tell where something starts and stops. But if I'm trying to be realistic to the photo, you can see that there is a very stark stop and finish of where those highlights are, so I have to be respectful to what I'm actually looking at. Working on the left half of her face, I'm trying to maintain the same process that I used for the right half. Again, just using the 5 mixed colors that I have to build up each layer of paint in order to create that more realistic looking fur. After doing that, I try to go back in and tidy up a little bit of that waterline on her eye, just because I know I put some fur over the line, so I want to make sure that I have the same shaping so that later when I work on the eye, it's easier to maintain that realistic look in comparison to having to redraw the shape that I've now painted on top of. So looking back at my reference photo, just to make sure that the left and right side are matching up, you can see that there's more of a caramel colored fur underneath Callie's eyes that not only show you where her eye area is, but when you look at that reference photo, you can actually see that the darker brown in comparison to the highlighted white by her snout helps to further distinguish the fur by her snout that's more forward than the fur under her eye, which is farther back in terms of the three-dimensionalness of the photo that we're looking at. Scratch that. The photo was a 2D photo, whereas Callie is the actual 3-dimensional figure that I took the photo of in real life. So really just trying to pay respect to the fact that Callie is not 2-dimensional and that her snout will be a little more forward while the fur in the back is in the back. Now, once again, I am painting in her eyes with a really dark brown in comparison to black, but I'd also like to mention that the dots of light that I am putting in her eyes are not actually white as of right now. That is a form of gray, because again, if later I want to be able to highlight that shine even further, I'm gonna need to be able to add more white to it, and you can't add any more white to white than white. I know, that was a little confusing, just roll with it. The idea that I'm using gray so that later when I use white, it's extra bright. Earlier, I used that caramel color by her eyes to show the difference in dimension from where her snout is versus her eyes farther back. And now I'm just using this chestnut brown to add the shadow that's within her fur in the reference photo as well. At this point, I have a majority of the fur down on the page by now, so I can start to actually build up those highlights by adding some white to the original 5 color mixtures that I have and just starting to apply the highlights in the fur that I'm seeing in my reference photo. At this point, I've worked enough on the face, so I'm going to start building up the fur on her neck. As you could see in this reference photo, that coloring is looking a little bit more like a russet caramel, so I'm making sure to properly build up each layer, going back and forth between a few colors, but this will take a little bit of time as I'm building up. You guys are watching a 16-minute video, but this was actually a 4-hour process of me working to build and build layers of colors for them to accurately represent the reference photo. At this point, I'm using a dark brown color to put down the first layer on the right side of Callie's neck since there's a lot more of a shadow there. Just like I did earlier with the snout when I put down the original dark brown and then decided to layer on top of it all of the creams and whites, that's what I'm going for the right side of her neck right now. So don't expect it to stay this dark brown forever. It's just letting it dry right now, and then from there, building up the fur on top of it. Looking back at my reference photo, you could see that Callie has a very light strip of fur, almost white, down the center of her neck. So I'm just building up the color on that for now, and I'll come back to it to tidy it up a little bit later. It's finally starting to feel like I'm almost done now that I'm working on the lower half of Callie's body and actually finishing up the sections of fur that I'll be needing to work on. It's still gonna take me some time. At this point, I think I was maybe 2.5 hours in, so I had about an hour and a half left of working on this lower half of her body as well as the actual collar. But again, it's just about patience, trusting the process, and building up that color slowly but surely, making sure to look back at that reference photo so that you're actually placing things where they belong in comparison to where your imagination just kind of takes you. Though I'd like to be clear that I do use my imagination for a lot of these parts. It's not like the fur looks perfectly perfect in comparison to the reference photo. I do take the time to, choose where I do and don't put down my strokes of paint and to use my creative license on this. But again, I am practicing a little bit of realism here, so I want to make sure that I'm going back, looking at my reference photo, and taking from it what I can to help improve the piece and make sure that it looks more realistic to what Callie looks like when you see her in person. So I retract. This is just more than a little bit of realism. Clearly, it's pretty realistic. So looking back at my reference photo once again, you can see that there are almost folds of fur with Callie, so kind of like stacks where there are parts that are more forefront and being touched by the light and parts that are more laid back into the shadow. So I'm just looking back to make sure that I'm actually creating a look that almost gives a fold. She is not tubby whatsoever, but she does have a little bit of extra skin, which shows through shadows and highlights of the fur. So I'm just trying to keep that in mind as I move forward and create this more realistic looking fur. And yes, it's going to take a lot of building up of paint in order to get this effect. One of the reasons why I go in and have to build up my highlights so often is not just because you should build your highlights up, in my opinion, you should build your highlights up rather than just plaster down something bright. But it's also keeping in mind that acrylic paint dries darker than what you put it down on the page as. So I would much rather start with a darker color and then build up to a lighter color and lighter and lighter and lighter in comparison to just adding a crap ton of white to one of my colors, dropping it down as a highlight, and then having to deal with the consequence of this is so much brighter than I expected it to be. So just trusting the process, working slowly, and understanding that layer building is your best friend. But of course you know that already since I've mentioned it about 8,000 times on this video. But anyways, at this point, I'm just finishing up Callie's nose. She has a very pink nose towards the top of it, but as you get to the bottom, it's a lot more brown. And then she has her cute little 2 freckles at the top, which I absolutely adore. But, you know, just working through that. And now wow, I'm moving fast. I'm on my collar. Oh, wow, I'm moving really fast. Okay, I'm letting the collar dry, and I'm starting to add some more stark highlights to different places, allowing them to dry, blending them into other colors, and just working those layers the best I can. And now I'm adding the blue stripes to the collar from the reference photo. I'm not a fan of doing super detailed collars, but this one wasn't too bad for the most part, enough so that I could finish it without any real issue. It's definitely something that I want to practice moving forward because I don't want to feel like I can't do something, or, you know, that I have to spend an exorbitant amount of time on something, so much so that it makes me feel a little bit dread around it. So I'm making sure to definitely practice things like more detailed collars as I'm moving forward with my pet portraits. At this point, I am almost done with the portrait. I'm just adding this blue background behind Callie. I went with blue because I used a lot of oranges to create that caramel tone in Callie's fur. So I figure with blue and orange being complementary colors, that blue background would complement the orange tones found in her fur. But a little bit of a spoiler alert, I did decide to completely change the background after sitting with this painting for about a week or so. There wasn't anything wrong with the background or the painting itself at all. It's just that the longer that I had the painting, you know, just kind of sitting behind me on my easel, the more often I thought about different ways that I could change it up and make it more fun and just a great way to reflect Callie's actual personality. And after one night of having a crazy dream about throwing my dog Sage a birthday party where everyone got a bunch of party favors, it dawned on me that I needed to make Callie the diva that she is. So I decided to make some adjustments. But first, let us satisfyingly rip off this tape, because what is better than it actually going well? I've had a lot of times where the tape has ripped the paper and ripped my heart to shreds with it, but for now, damn. Admit I didn't do the best job of recording the rest of this process. I kind of not rushed through it, but I was so excited to get this down that I literally did not even think of recording the process in the same way I recorded the rest of this. Either way, I hope you enjoy the additions that I made, because I know I definitely did. So what do you think? She's so cute. And that's my art process for how I create a pet portrait. I'm really excited to have been able to share this with you guys at this point, because it means that not only have I grown so much as an artist that I can actually trust the process, but even more than that, I can explain my process to you and get you guys the inside scoop of what's going on behind the camera, as well as what's going on inside my head as I'm creating these pet portraits. So if you have any specific questions or comments, please feel free to drop them below. But otherwise, like and subscribe so that you can get notified for my next video, and I will see you in the next one.